네, 잠시 안내 말씀드리겠습니다. 잠시 후 WCE 2023 기후산업국제박람회 도시서밋 2부 탄소중립 도시 세션이 시작될 예정입니다. 참석자분들께서는 행사장 내로 입장하셔서 자리에 착석해 주시기 바랍니다. 아울러 휴대전화 상태도 점검 부탁드리겠습니다. 무음 혹은 진동으로 변경해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 본 심포지엄에서는 동시통역 서비스가 제공되고 있습니다. 있습니다. 채널 1번은 한국어, 채널 2번은 영어로 맞추시면 서비스를 받아보실 수 있습니다. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, may I have your attention, please? The Carbon Neutral City Conference will begin shortly. I'd like to cordially ask all participants to enter the hall and be seated. And to minimize any interruptions, please turn your phone into vibration mode or switch them off. And furthermore, simultaneous interpretation will be provided during the event. Please tune into Channel 1 for Korean and Channel 2 for English. Thank you very much. 네, 다시 한번 안내 말씀드리겠습니다. 잠시 후 행사가 시작될 예정이니까요. 참석자 여러분들께서는 행사장 안으로 입장하셔서 착석해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. Ladies and gentlemen, the event will begin momentarily. I'd like to ask all participants to enter the hall and be seated. Thank you very much.
We will now begin with the World Climate Industry Expo's Urban Summit's Carbon Neutral City Conference. Good afternoon. Welcome to the World Climate Industry Expo and to Urban Summit's second session of Carbon Neutral City Conference. I will be your MC today, and my name is Jo Jin-kyung. It is nice to meet you. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the distinguished guests and companies and participants from universities and research centers related to smart city and environment and others. Let me go through today's program. This conference is the second part of Urban Summit, and it's Carbon Neutral City Conference. I believe it will be an informative and thought-provoking session, and I will briefly introduce the symposium. This conference is to look at the cases of the cities striving to achieve carbon neutrality. And we will find ways for cities to reduce carbon emissions and create a more sustainable future in response to the climate crisis. We will have the opening remarks, keynote speeches, and panel discussion for the session. We will now begin with the opening address by Director General Gil Byung-woo of Urban Policy of MOLIT. Following on, Floating Cities Creating Habitat Solutions that Adapt to Climate Change will be presented by Mr. Matteo Pietrobel, CTO of Oceanix. And the second presentation will be Carbon Neutrality in Copenhagen, Innovative Ideas and Success Stories, delivered by Professor Kim Norman Andersen of Copenhagen Business School. Last presentation will be on how to develop a healthy youth trait, delivered by Ms. Erlyn Mulder, Senior Strategist in Utrecht. Then we will have a panel discussion moderated by Dr. Jo Dae-yeon, Senior Researcher at Kaya, with the three presenters and Professor Song Jae-min of Seoul National University Graduate School of Environment and Professor Chung Joo-chul of Urban Engineering at Busan National University. As we have renowned speakers to the session, I hope it will be a valuable time and you will get lots of information of global cases of a smart city. Without further ado, we will get started with the Carbon Neutral City Conference of the Urban Summit of WCE 2023. We will first invite Director General Gil Byung-woo of Urban Policy at MOLIT. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Gil Byung-woo, Director General for Urban Policy from the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport. I am very pleased to meet you here for the Carbon Neutral City Conference of the 2023 World Climate Industry Expo. First, I would like to thank the experts from home and abroad who joined us to discuss how cities can respond to climate crisis. I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to the audience for taking the time to join us and the staff of Korea Agency for Infrastructure Technology and Advancement. Today's conference is designed to share the experiences of major global cities and explore the future under the theme of rising above the climate crisis towards sustainable prosperity. I'm sure that the prototype model of the floating city, which will be presented by Oceanix CTO Matteo Pietrovelli, and the examples of Copenhagen and Utrecht which will be presented by Professor Kim Norman Anderson from Copenhagen Business School and Ms. Elaine Mulder, Senior Strategist for Urban Development from the City of Utrecht, will inspire us and as examples of how to become a carbon neutral city. The climate crisis is one of the most serious issues facing the world and cities. And cities are major emitters of greenhouse gases and the most affected at the same time. So it's up to the cities to become carbon neutral and find sustainable solutions. We need to explore and implement innovative solutions in areas such as transportation, energy, and architecture. And we need to transform our city's policies and governance system. The Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport is supporting the creation of smart cities and hydrogen cities that can respond to climate crisis. Various smart solutions for carbon reduction, such as power trading services utilizing renewable energy, have been established in Jeju and Gwangju. And hydrogen cities are being built in 6 cities, including Pyeongtaek, Dangjin, and Gwangyang, starting with the hydrogen pilot cities in Busan, Jeonju, and Ansan. In addition to this support, various policies are being promoted, such as the transformation of the urban planning system to achieve the goal of carbon neutrality, and establishment of carbon spatial map that shows the carbon emissions generated by cities. However, despite the government's efforts, there are still challenges and issues that need to be addressed. I hope that today's conference will give us the opportunity to discuss these challenges and share our experiences and knowledge and inspire cities around the world to work together to create the city models of the future. Thank you.
네, 정책
Director General Kill, thank you for your excellent speech. Mr. Kill spared his invaluable time to attend this meeting, and he extends gratitude for all the audience. And he introduced us with the policies implemented by the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport. I hope that you can be this conference can be insightful for all of you. Let's begin the session. The first presentation will be made by Mr. Matteo Pietrobelli, CTO of Oceanics. Who is working on the Oceanics BUSAN project, the world's first prototype of floating community. Matteo Pietrobelli is CTO of Oceanics and CEO of Agripublica and Nomogram Engineering. Mr. Matteo Pietrobelli will be presenting on the topic of floating cities, creating habitat solutions that adapt to climate change. And he's an expert in Hyperloop transportation system. And also, he is engaged in floating infrastructure project in countries around the world. And today, his presentation will focus on the Oceanics BUSAN projects. I would like to introduce you, Mr. Matteo Pietrobelli, to the stage.
기빈 여러분, 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시기
Please give him a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you to the city of Busan for allowing us to introduce the project of the floating cities and the, I would say, first example of such application around the world. I would like to start with first showing you a video of what is our vision. All right, it was supposed to audio, but I'm glad that we had the opportunity to share it with you. So the reason why we started with this idea is because of mostly issues related to the, of course, seawater level rising, but also in relation to the problem related to the increase of population. We do know that by 2050, more than 10 billion of people will be around the world living in our planet. This will mean increasing of urban areas, living urban areas, as well as energy demand, as well as emissions from cities. Just to have an order of understanding of what we mean by that, the situation will look like almost adding the city of London every 2 months for the next 35 years in terms of emissions, and as well as in terms of footprint and square footages of area. And this is just in addition to the fact that the construction industry represents almost 50% of the global carbon emissions. And the last problem, which was one that really was keen to our heart, is that coastal cities represent 90% of the biggest cities in the world. And we know that by 2050, 90% of these world cities will be affected by the rising sea levels. Busan is an example, but we can also see examples like Rio de Janeiro, Wellington, Miami, and situations like the Venetian causeways of Miami, or Venice, which is where my family is from. And this is just an example of the vision, or at least the forecast of what is going to happen by 2100. Certain areas will be submerged. They will be covered by 9 meters of water in terms of seawater level rising in relation to our benchmark. And so what we did is we learned from communities that are, as of now, already living on water. Communities that have been tackling, have been showing resiliency. And in addition to these communities, we learn from other sustainable initiatives around the world, such as the drone cities or the climate cities or the waste city, focus on specific sustainable individual sustainability efforts. And really by learning also and improving and taking inputs by the ESG goals, and by leveraging the ESG goals, raising the bars in order to reach full sustainability for all of the systems that are related to urban habitat, such as energy, water, waste, mobility, food, and habitat regeneration. And really what we did is we started also learning by communities, or learning from people. And in addition to that, we also start to learn from nature. And therefore, what we did is, by collecting all of these different efforts, all of these different information, we decided to try to find a solution that was also scalable in size in order to accommodate a project and a vision that would be able to support more than 26,000 people living on the water. And the result is a sustainable and flood-proof solution that is adaptive, it's scalable, it's reconfigurable, and it is able to adapt to all of the evolving needs. And really, by doing that, our design channels the flows of the energy and the water and the waste and all of the other systems into a very sustainable maritime metropolis. So the question is, how do we do that? We start with a modular platform that can be assembled on the water, a modular platform that is affordable, it's scalable, it's safe, and of course, it's floating, meaning that will allow to support all of the habitat on top of it in terms of counteracting the seawater level rising. The hull will be able to accommodate all of the different subsystems necessary for living habitats or the other different use cases that will be on top of it. And therefore, what we did is we developed our own kit of parts. Kit of parts that are completely integrated systems, closed-loop systems that are vertically integrated between the top side and the hull side of the platform. By doing that, we develop what we call our oceanic city ecosystem of closed-loop systems. And by leveraging sustainable materials, specifically local, eco-friendly materials for different type of applications, we approached it from a top-side development and also from a hull-side development. And by as well focusing on the energy resiliency, on the low emissions, we really wanted to develop a self-sustainable solution. In addition to that, not only a self-sustainable solution, not only a floating solution, but also a smart solution, and really integrating it with sensors and data so to really gather and to provide the best experience to its inhabitants. And in addition, our systems allow us to be completely independent from the mainland. Means that we won't need to deal with all of the legacy networks that are really present, utilities, aqueducts, waste systems, energy systems that exist inland. And ours are completely independent, are contained into the platforms, and allows the city to be completely reconfigurable, towable, and repurposable. So what is going to be on top of it? You can put many types of buildings in terms of shapes, in terms of size, but also in terms of use cases. Hotels, they can be schools, hospitals, habitats. And really by leveraging our urban design guidelines, we wanted to build and to develop what is a vibrant public realm. And so just to give you a glimpse, this is just an example of the platform program section for the living space with the fully integrated system vertically on the top side as well as on the hull side. And this is just a glimpse of the distribution of the different components between top side and hull side. But for BUSAN, what we're really focused on is developing 3 platforms. A research platform dedicated to a blue tech hub for innovation, a living space, and a lodging space for hospitality. This is just a vision, a schematics of the platforms and the 3 platforms that wants to achieve the possibility of accommodating more than 12,000 people between residents and tourists. Platforms that are all interconnected within each other, and they're also interconnected with the mainland through bridges, and they are also interconnected in terms of macro mobility with the mainland and the main transportation systems such as the train and buses. Therefore, becoming what we like to call a smooth transition between the existing city and the new neighborhood, a floating neighborhood. And really what we did is learning by BUSAN urban fabric and BUSAN public realm, by BUSAN characteristics and unique alleys. And therefore, we ended up with this design, a design that also captured in the uniqueness in its own prefabricated and high-performance building facade. This is just an example of how it's going to look from the top as a cross-section or as a plan view, and this is a renderized view of our platforms. And so the vision is, this is BUSAN, North Port Redevelopment Project, and we're going to be in phase 1, located nearby the marina. But let's dive deep into what these platforms are going to look like. Let's start with the Innovation Hub. The Innovation Hub will have a series of architectural features integrated within each other in order to guarantee and to develop a proper architecture program. An architecture program that will be also integrated vertically and horizontally with data in order to become the first smart innovation hub focused on tackling climate change and ocean and blue tech issues from around the world. The second platform, which is the living space, wants to really represent the best of the community of BUSAN already existing, and by capturing those, recreating them on the platform, guaranteeing the best experience for the citizens. And by adding the layer of data, by creating a more safer and a digital system that will allow to also have a better experience for the citizens. This is an example from the view of the side of the living space, but let's focus now on the lodging space. The lodging space is as well unique because it has a full set of different architectural features as well, focus on guaranteeing a very smooth transition, a very smooth experience for the tourists, but also for all the visitors that will come and want to understand what it means to live on a floating platform. And in addition to that, we want to also create awareness towards climate change, awareness towards the ocean, and how important it is for a city of BUSAN. And therefore, we wanted to also create an event spaces that were able to portray solutions like for climate change solutions or ocean solutions. And as the other platforms, the lodging platform will also have vertically integrated system for that with the data in order to basically guarantee a seamless experience for the guests. And so this is an example of how they're going to look like during the day or during the night, or the view of the river directly from the platforms. In addition to that, we wanted to add to the platform what we thought was very characteristic of Busan, which is something that represents the regenerative approach, something that represents the communal approach, as well as the mobility part. And so what we did is we created these petals, and each one of the petals is very unique. The regenerative petal has is focused on adopting and developing aeroponic, hydroponic, and aquaponic system for food produce and produce productions as well. The communal space, in the same way, represents gathering space for people. And the multi-mobility hub is another example of how we can attract tourists, or in general, allow mobility not just from land, but also from water. And this is just a view in the night from the harbor. But we don't want to stop at 3 platforms. We believe this is an example of how we can live resiliently and how to tackle climate change through climate adaptation solutions. And therefore, we want to grow. We want to be bigger. We want to be a new neighborhood. And we think Busan is the best example, because Busan is the first city that accepted the challenge and is actually helping in supporting the challenge and finding the solution. And after doing this, with all of the different systems that are completely integrated, closed loop, and sustainable, why not applying on land as well? And by doing that, by the learning ground that was developed in Busan, why not actually applying this around the world? And so why not applying this in the Middle East, for example, in Africa? Why not applying this in Southeast Asia, for example, or in the northern regions of the world? Why not helping cities or island states like the Maldives to tackle their problems in seawater level rising? Why not actually applying this to Lagos? Why not applying this in New Zealand to Wellington or Monaco? Or what about Dubai? And maybe we can apply this in Rio de Janeiro, Miami, or maybe even New York. 감사합니다.
네, CTO님.
Thank you, Mr. Pietrobelli, for your insightful presentation. And the city that is adapted to the carbon neutrality, and I believe Busan will be one of the best fit cities for this case. And thank you for sharing the good case. Next, we will have Professor Kim Norman Andersen of Copenhagen Business School presenting us on carbon neutrality in Copenhagen, innovative ideas and success stories. Professor Andersen is the director of IT program of Copenhagen Business School, and he is a professor of smart city and robot technology. He has served as a visiting scholar in Asia, the US, and Europe, participating in various international cooperations and joint research projects to have advanced technology adopted to realize the government visions. Let us welcome him to the stage with a big round of applause.
To the stage. 귀빈 여러분, 큰 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It's so exciting. I've been in Busan before, and come back here is just so fantastic, and I really look forward to be here with you and the discussion afterwards. So thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm going to share with you some success stories from Copenhagen. I also want to underline there are a lot of great stories from a lot of cities in the world. Copenhagen is just one of them. And while I do that, I will, of course, not be able to tell all the details, but you're welcome to contact me afterwards if you want more details. So between Korea and Denmark, there's a long tradition of collaboration, actually more than 60 years of collaboration, of diplomatic ties between Korea and Denmark. So not only do we share history, but we also share a lot of common interest and characteristics with regards to carbon emission, like shared goals of reducing carbon emission, but we also compete about being the best or the most digitalized country in the world. So sometimes Denmark is ranked top in the most digital country in the world. Actually, many more times Korea is ranked higher. So we have a lot to learn from Korea in terms of how to use technology. You're much better than we are, but we might be also a bit different in how Korea is using technology. If we look at the greenhouse emission in two countries, they look a bit different. In Korea, which you see on the, I believe it's the right-hand side for you, electricity and heating is on the very top. In Denmark, it's transportation, agriculture that lead to most of the emission. Copenhagen, the one interesting thing about the emission from Denmark is that it's been reduced quite dramatically since the 1990s. Of course, the accumulated emission is still increasing, but if you look at the marginal emission, it has been reduced quite a lot since the 90s. So let's look at the Copenhagen case then. I want to give you 5 key stories or key points from Copenhagen. So first of all, the plan in Copenhagen is to reduce emission totally in 25. So by 2025, the emission should be 0 from Copenhagen. That is in 2 years from now. There's a big agreement about this goal. They want to do it. I also want to emphasize a lot of cooperation with private actors, NGOs, universities, and quasi-governmental organizations. So it's not only a government project, it's pretty much like a shared ambition. Part of the story is not actually reducing the emission as such by less consumption, but also capture the smoke from the waste facilities in Copenhagen. And lastly, whatever they do in Copenhagen, they always try to comply with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Right. So here are some images from what I'm going to tell you about in a bit. They're not as fancy as the images you saw before. Maybe that's indicate that I'm a professor, not a salesperson, but I hope you live with it. So let me just move forward. So in the case of transportation, one of the images that you associate with the Copenhagen infrastructure is the many bike lanes that you would find everywhere in the city. Not only are the bike lanes, there are extensive highways for bike transportation. I myself has many bikes that I use and we use for transportation with ourselves and with the kids. It goes well with the office outfit in Copenhagen. You can come to office wearing your bike outfit that would not go in Korea. But I still want to mention it, that this is a really key part of transportation and reducing the emission in the city. It's a high priority to increase the bike lane infrastructure, actually much more than increasing the metro, subways, or the freeways. Similar to what we saw before is the idea of having more efficient energy and put part of it in Ireland is very strong. I want to mention here that when we talk about energy in Copenhagen, it's really it has many meanings into it. One of them is the central district heating or centralized approach to district heating, but there's also a clear policy of district cooling. And I think that's a unique thing to highlight, that when we think about electricity, it's not only for heating the houses, it's also about cooling the machines in industry and part of the service sector too, computing and so forth. And I think that is a unique thing to mention, that they are quite successful in that area of combining heating and cooling in the policy and implementation. They also are very strong in putting up standards for buildings and for material handling and machinery for construction. The massive innovation we have seen in battery production, battery capacity, mainly happen outside the country. But the thing with Copenhagen, they're very good at adopting the new technology and turn it into, like you could call it, business benefits. So using the battery capacity and to demand for companies to actually use it for machinery. As far as I could see the latest data, about 10% of the emission relate to construction in the city. And it's, of course, if we could reduce that even more, we are closer to the carbon-free city in 2 years from now. Green spaces, if you look at this chart of Europe, you can see all the green spots are in the north part of Europe. The tiny country you can see there on top of Germany next to Sweden, that is Denmark. It's all green there. It doesn't mean there are a lot of parks actually, but it means there are access to different green spaces and small cottages that you find in the area. So the resource center of Amager is a waste treatment facility. So during summer and winter, I have taken my kids to downhill skiing training at this roof of the waste management facility. During summer, there's no snow, but you can still ski there. It's prepared for it. During winter, there is snow. And I think this is a really interesting way of integrating waste treatment facilities with urban living. So it's right in the middle of the city. And it turns into like an amusement park. I think this is a unique thing to do. Most of the time we put waste treatment away from the cities. We put them out in the outer skirts of the city. We don't want to deal with it. I think this is interesting because it also have a awareness building of kids that the waste we are producing, that it also need to be taken care of. In this case, they not only have the exhibitions in it, but they also have this idea that you can go and play there on top of the waste management facilities. What they also have done at this facility is they have started putting technology for carbon capture and storage. They are not so successful as planned so far. They did anticipate it to be ready already this year. It is delayed, but the ambition is still there, and they might going to be delayed by another 2 or 3 years. They are moving ahead. The big problem here is the scaling and the readiness of the technology for deployment. It's getting there. They're also working on carbon capture and storage elsewhere in Denmark. Let me mention in the North Sea, where they try to fill the gas spaces with captured carbon emission, and it seemed to be very successful. The first licenses have just been rewarded. So it sounds like a really big success, that things are going well in Copenhagen, but of course there are challenges. The biggest problem I see from the Copenhagen case is that carbon emission is not the only thing at the political agenda. There are so many other things that government has to deal with. Childcare, schooling, elder care, just to mention a few. To get enough budget in government is a challenge in Copenhagen like anywhere else. We need to solve that globally, and maybe we can discuss it in the panel discussion of how to solve this issue. It's really a big problem. Being at a business school where I teach normally, the way I see it is that we need to have much more collaboration with the private sector in all countries, and to make it profitable to invest in carbon emission, and possible to introduce some reward system for carbon emission by private actors much more aggressively. But that's one challenge. The other big problem is the delays in technology. So if you go to the exhibition hall here and any other conferences around the world, there are some delays in the development and scaling and implementation. It's definitely worth trying, and I think the Copenhagen case is showing the way and to be inspired by. But we just need to be a bit more patient with some of the technology deployment, and I think sometimes politicians are a bit impatient to get result. But the good thing is that they also can see the rising sea level, as we heard before. So overall, I think they are doing fantastic. The third point was the return of investment. Again, this is a business school term, but I'm sure you're familiar with it. So the return on investment is pretty long-term. Most governments run on current budgets. So that's also an issue. And then the last challenge I would point to is the many levels of government in Europe. I think Korea is probably better in that sense. Copenhagen belong to a state government. They also belong to EU level. So a lot of consensus things that need to be in place for some of the problems. Great. I'm just saying there are some challenges, but don't let that take away from looking at some of the examples I gave you, and we can discuss them. Right. So just to round up, so I think that the take home from this short introduction is that there's a very proactive strategy in Copenhagen, carbon neutral by 25. It might be a bit delayed, but the policy is very clear. They want to make it. Renewable energy is big time. And you can see it physically from your harbor area in Copenhagen, both the renewable energy sources of windmills, but also the waste management thing that I mentioned. The sustainable transportation, like bike lanes stuff, is really a big thing. The green spaces is a big thing to also remember, and then this extensive collaboration with the private sector. So I think that will be my input for the panel. Thank you so much for listening, and hope to talk about this issue in discussion and potentially see you in Copenhagen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. Wonderful presentation. 네, 좋은 사례 공유해 주신
Thank you, Professor, for your excellent presentation. Thank you once again. Until 2025, Copenhagen set up its ambition to achieve carbon neutrality, and I hope that the Republic of Korea could reach our goal of carbon neutrality as well. And next, moving on, we have the final city case. We have the next speaker standing by to present the final city case. We have Erling Mulder, Senior Strategist for the City of Utrecht. She is an advisor to the City of Utrecht and other cities around the world. She joined us online, and thank you so much for joining us despite the huge time difference. The topic of today's presentation is developing a healthy Utrecht. She's online now. Ms. Mulder, are you online? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share the story of Utrecht. Let me first tell you something more about my city, because I can imagine that in Korea, not everybody knows the city of Utrecht. Utrecht is the 4th largest city in the Netherlands, and it's a very old city. Last year we celebrated our 900th anniversary, but our roots even go back to Roman times. And here you can see our famous Dome Tower, which is already 700 years old as well. We have 800 years old canals, which we use for leisure, but even also for transport and logistics. All the shops and the restaurants are supplied by electrical boats. And also we collect our waste by electrical boats along these medieval canals. Utrecht is famous for Miffy, which is born in our city, and the architect Rietveld. But it's a very connected city as well. It's based in the very heart of the Netherlands, with Schiphol Airport and Amsterdam only half an hour away by train, but Frankfurt and Paris are 3.5 hours by train as well. We have the largest train station in the Netherlands, with over 300,000 travelers each and every day. And just as Copenhagen, Utrecht is a bicycle city. I think Copenhagen and Utrecht are the top 2 bicycle cities in the world, and every day more than 100,000 bicycles roam through our city center. We have the largest bicycle parking facility in the world, right under our central station. It's a 3-story building underground to park your bike. But in the whole central station area, it adds up to over 30,000 bicycle parking spots. Utrecht is also the fastest growing city in the Netherlands. And with fast growth come challenges. Challenges like it's getting more crowded. We're a bicycle city, a world bicycle city, but we also had the first bicycle traffic jam in the world. So that gets you thinking. And of course, air and noise pollution. How do we tackle these challenges in an ever-growing city? So what did Utrecht do? We put health at the heart of our urban development strategy. And we created the strategy of the 10-minute city. And that means, well, we translated that for our city in the Utrecht barcode. So what we say is when we build 10,000 houses in our city, so a new neighborhood, that means we also have to add a certain amount of green, of sports facilities, of sustainable energy concepts, public transport, etc. So creating new neighborhoods, which we really have to do, also means that we have to create other facilities. And that means shift in thinking. So about accessibility and clean transport, for instance. And these are some of the examples that we're working on in our city, but it also means principled choices for the development of Utrecht. For instance, the principal choice for sustainable mobility and healthy transportation. So we put the bicycle and the pedestrians first in our mobility policy. Of course, you can still enter the city by car, but preferably with electrical vehicles and even preferably by shared vehicles. So we have a lot of electrical shared vehicle systems in our city. And we actively redesign streets. So this is a street which is quite, well, normal, what we're used to nowadays. But these are the streets that we are redesigning. And as you can see, the underground is a part of that redesign as well. For us, the underground is very important as well. And these are examples of those redesigns. So we're doing that already, but we are going to upscale that. And as you can see, the street with the first bicycle traffic jam in the world now looks totally different. It also means a systematic leap for our urban nature strategy. With a 30% increase of citizens in 20 years and condensation by infill, we also said we need 440 extra hectares for nature and green in the city. But where? And that is something we ask ourselves every day. Here you can see an old train rail route, which we redeveloped into a park and a bicycle cycling route. So green planning has really transformed from single-use, low-maintenance cost into a strategic part of our urban development strategy with multiple functional use in order to tackle to help climate adaptation, to increase biodiversity, health and well-being for our citizens, and also make it available, accessible, and affordable for all of our citizens. And here you can see that we do it on different scales. So it is about fingers and green belts, but also the framework of our city and the neighborhoods. And this is an example. It's a solution came up with a private investor who wanted to have the tender for our new bus stops. And we said, make it sustainable and healthy for the city. And he created bee-friendly bus stops with green roofs. And they are all over our city now. So sometimes it's just small examples, but with a very big symbolic meaning. The first vertical forest in the Netherlands is right now being built in the central station area of Utrecht. And this is one of our biggest new urban developments, Merwede, named after the canal that is along the new neighborhood. We are creating 10,000 houses in this neighborhood with the biggest ATES system of Europe underground, but a very low parking norm. So this neighborhood is almost car-free. And a lot of car sharing is possible, but it's not, well, practically not possible to own your own car. We are creating mobility hubs and smart networks to enter this particular neighborhoods, but not to enter the neighborhood by car. And it is green, unless, and climate change proof. It means, for instance, that 50% of the roofs in this neighborhood are green, and the other 50% of the roofs have solar panels. And there's a special ecologist that advises the owners of this Merwede neighborhood in order to stimulate the big five of Merwede. So the buildings are even placed in a certain angle that the bats and the swallows can have their natural roots. So therefore we create green and car-free public areas and also attractive areas, because that adds to the health and the well-being of these new citizens. Another example is our Singel, which used to be a 12-lane highway right through our city center. It is a lot of asphalt. It was, I must say, because now it looks like this. So this is the Singel has been restored over the past 20 years, and it was opened during COVID, and it had a huge positive effect for our citizens as well. And they use it for a lot of leisure. And we do a lot of our things in collaboration by trying and testing and use the city as a living lab, so to say. And this is a cycling bridge which goes right through over the roof of a primary school. And at first it was too steep to make the bridge. So somebody came up with the idea to make a big curve. So now it's not only it's a transport route, but it's also a very nice design. Thank you for your attention.
네, 위트레일
Thank you for your presentation. Through green planning, the city has turned into a very healthy city. Thank you for sharing your wonderful case with us. Now the keynote presentations session is over, and it's time to move on to the panel discussion. And please wait a second until the stage is prepared. And this meaningful event is held in Busan metropolitan city. As you may have felt during your stay here, Busan is equipped with the state-of-the-art infrastructure. It is a safe and nice city, and with this wonderful view and infrastructure, Busan is the largest port city in Korea. And the world is now eyeing on Busan, which is preparing to host the 2030 World Expo. And I hope we will be able to see you again in the 2030 Expo in Busan. I think the stage is ready for the panel discussion. Let me introduce our panelists. Well, we'll have to wait for the microphones to be prepared.
네, 무대가 다
I think the stage is ready, and I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we will have the moderator, that's senior researcher of Jo Dae-yeon of KAIA, and he will be moderating the discussion. Dr. Jo has served the director of Smart City Project and Future Strategy Group at KAIA. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
네, 다음으로
Next, let me introduce our panelists. We have Professor Song Jae-min of Grad School of Environment at Seoul National University and Professor Jung Joo-chul of Urban Engineering at Busan National University. Professor Song Jae-min currently serves as the Standing Director of Korea Planning Association and the Head of Climate Change Committee Editor at the association. She is also a member of Special Committee on Smart City of 4th IR Committee under the President. Professor Jung Joo-chul is Head of Smart City Innovative Talent Nurturing Project at Busan National University, and he is the Head of Graduate School of Climate Change. He is also an International Director of Environmental Impact Assessment. We will also invite our keynote presenters to the stage for the panel discussion. Mr. Matteo Pietrobelli and Professor Anderson, please come up to the stage for the discussion.
박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다.
Please welcome them with a big round of applause. We are also joined by Ms. Mulder online, who was our last presenter.
네, 이렇게 다 모든
So we have all the panelists on the stage, and I would like to pass the floor to the moderator.
네, 안녕하십니까.
Good afternoon. I am Jo Dae-yeon at KAIA. I've been long working on lots of projects related to smart city, and recently, rather than smart city, my focus is on the carbon neutrality and climate change. Amid this environment, it is my honor to have this kind of conference in this wonderful city of Busan. It is my honor to moderate this session. And all the panelists have been introduced, and I would like to try to listen to the comments of our panelists. Achieving a carbon neutral city is very important, and that is kind of consensus amongst even experts. In order to go ahead with this vision, we need to have a collaboration between all the experts as well as the citizens and lots of people. And it takes a lot of efforts of all these related parties. And I believe this will be an opportunity for us to be able to share all the insights related to this.
주제에 대해서
So we had 3 presentations. So I'd like to ask for their comments, ask our panelists for their comments. Well, I'll give each panelist about 3 minutes. First, I'd like to ask Professor Song to give us your comments on the 3 presentations.
네,
I am Song Jae-min. I have been introduced already, and I would like to thank for inviting me to be here today. While listening to the presentation, I guess all of you felt the same. In case of Copenhagen and Utrecht, I really wanted to visit there, and I am sure that you might feel the same. So regarding the first presentation, the Oceanics BUSAN project, I would like to share my thoughts on that. While listening to the presentation, I could see the history of humanity is the sum of challenges and fighting back. Well, as we are facing the climate crisis, we are making a lot of attempts, and those attempts are very innovative and create a lot of opportunities for us. And these kind of innovations are something that was unthinkable before. And in going forward, it will present us a sustainable options. In case of Oceanics project, these kind of pilot projects are very important because it shouldn't stay as a prototype or pilot project. It should be scalable, and it should. So scalability is very important. And I think as Oceanics project is based on modular approach, it has strength because it is scalable. The concept of Oceanics is very new. Therefore, in going forward, we need to think about the planning and engineering. In the process of engineering, not just from scientific aspect, we need to think about the needs of the citizens who will live there. We need to see the lifestyle of the citizens and the habits of how people live. I think we need to spare a lot of time thinking about that. In addition, we saw the real cases of Copenhagen and the city of Utrecht. While listening to the model cases, I could see some similarity and differences between those cities and Korea. While establishing carbon neutral city plan, what's important is to assess which location is the biggest emitter within the city and which policy will be most impactful. We need to think about the scale of the city and characteristic of the industry and the city fabric and so on. Those are the rules important in determining the success of the carbon neutrality plan. And I could summarize 3 approaches while listening to the presentation. And a carbon neutral approach can be summarized into 3 steps. One is reducing the consumption, and I could find that during the 2 presentations. And second is the renewable energy source, using the renewable energy sources, such as eco-friendly mobility and so on. And lastly, third, we need to have carbon capture technology and create green space. And the second speaker mentioned about carbon capture technology, which is yet to realize, but I think those kind of things are very important. In case of Korea, we tried to make a 10-minute city and bicycle roads and local heating system and so on. But depending on the cities, the success of each policies and initiatives are different depending on the city. So we need to think about those things. We need to think about the context of municipal cities and so on. In that context, I think today's conference was very important because we could share different cases, different model cases, and could see the traits of each cities and challenges that each cities face. And active discussion on that is very important, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, when you talk about cities, we can go on and on. So I think we are going to have to integrate all the ideas after having all the discussions. And Professor Anderson also mentioned we need a comprehensive discussion, and we're going to wrap it up later. And following on, I'd like to ask Professor Jung for his comment. All the Oceanics project, I've heard of it several times. And I believe Busan has been selected as a pilot city to go ahead with this project. And we are now at the Carbon Neutrality City Conference. And I believe we are doing this in response to the climate change. And we have to talk about how to reduce the carbon emission. And we will also have to think about the measures to tackle the rising sea level. And Busan was offered by the UN Habitat to go ahead with this project, and we are now, the project is underway. That's to the best of my knowledge, and the picture looked very nice. But I believe there are so many things to be resolved. For example, we have to get prepared for the typhoon, or we will also have to think about the water quality underneath the panel, and how to source, what about the financing the project. So as other professor mentioned, it is a challenge. When the city was first presented, it was also presented as a garden city, and Oceanics could be a challenge that we have to tackle, and we have to give a real hard thinking to it. And about the cases of Copenhagen and Detroit, I will talk about it later by showing the Busan case. I believe those are the cases that Busan want to take after. And Copenhagen has been reducing carbon emissions for about 20 to 30 years, and your goal is to achieve net zero or carbon neutrality by 2025. Well, there are some cases that can be incorporated in Busan, and I'll talk about it later during the discussion. In the case of Detroit, you said you were the first city in the world to have a bicycle traffic jam. I really envy that. And in the case of Busan, I will talk about later, but it's a heavily dependent on vehicles, actually. Well, the reality is that we are now at the crossroads to become a public transportation friendly city or in a passenger car friendly city. But I believe we are moving towards the vehicle centered city or dependent city. And I really envy that your population is increasing by 30%, and our population is decreasing, whereas the carbon emission is rising. I think that's the point we have to also discuss.
Thank you for your comments. Later on, we will give you the floor again so that you can make comments. And moving on, I would like to pose my question to Mr. Matteo Pietroballi. While listening to the Oceanics case, it was a floating smart city prototype. And I could see that it was an extension of the mainland or creating a new infrastructure. And I think it is a middle of the extension of mainland and a new infrastructure on the sea. And I'm not sure whether it can pose a solution to the climate change era. So I would like to pose this detailed question. So cities around the globe face tough challenges when it comes to climate change and carbon emissions. So what do you think is the most difficult in terms of global effort for carbon neutral city? There are cities on the ground, so we need to think about the relationship with the mainland and so on. And I would like to know how much we should invest in order to create one. And do you think it will be able to address the climate crisis using that? Do you have the confidence to that? That's my question.
All right, thank you so much. The idea of oceanics and the reason why it started is because we were trying to find a solution for a very specific set of problems, which are mostly related to the coastal cities, and therefore related to the biggest threat, which is the seawater level rising. And because seawater level rising and overpopulation are thoroughly integrated, they will be also even more integrated by the need of creating housing and allowing for new place to live for potential climate refugees. The idea of the floating city was, or the idea of the floating habitat or floating infrastructure was born as a solution of embracing water instead of retreating from water. In relation to this being the silver bullet solution that can be used everywhere, this is not something that can be used absolutely everywhere. This is not a solution that will fix everything. This is not a solution that will solve climate change. I believe this is a solution that can really help tackling climate adaptation. I do believe that if we're not prepared to address early on what are the risks and the different scenarios that can come out of seawater level rising and overpopulation, and as well as carbon emissions, I believe we're going to find ourselves too short of time. And coastal cities do represent some of the biggest cities in the world. In the 25 biggest cities in the world, 17 are coastal. And I think it becomes a priority to understand, or it becomes a priority to focus ourselves on absolutely tackling climate change and therefore find a way to mitigate climate change. But I also believe it is important, and we owe it to the citizens of the world, as professionals, as politicians, as professors, as academics, to actually find and propose a solution that can help them also in case of tackling climate adaptation. That's what I think it is.
네.
Then, adding on to that, I have an additional question to that. And the mankind is facing climate change, and we have the model to cope with this. And a lot of people talk about Neom City of Saudi Arabia as a new vision city, and as a competitor to this Neom City, Oceanix could be a competitor. And there must be some technical requirements for these. And what can you compare the approaches of Neom City and Oceanix? What is the biggest difference between the approaches between Neom City and Oceanix?
Well, this is a very interesting question, because as Oceanics, you can imagine that by all of the visibility that we had so far, we were able to communicate with actually the city, the Neom City, and specifically the Oxagon development program. The situation is, Busan is the second largest city in South Korea, and Busan has, or I would say Busan is, a social, technical, economical system. It represents an ecosystem of businesses, of culture, of history, it's an ethnographical representation of a city. And therefore, it does represent a different challenge in the terms of that we're not building anything from scratch. We're just trying to find a solution as a sort of a plug-in to an existing city, a plug-in to an existing history, an existing social network. While the Oxagon project, or say the Neom project in and of itself, is a new development in places where there is right now absolutely nothing. And that really, I would say, represents in and of itself the biggest difference between the two projects. In addition to that, as far as my knowledge, based on my conversation with the NEOM and the Oxagon officials, the floating component of the Oxagon development will be dedicated exclusively to the industrial program in terms of real estate. What we're trying to do here, we're trying to create a solution for humans, for a solution that can help dealing with climate change, dealing with seawater level rising, not just to develop something that is specifically industrial related, because in this case, Busan doesn't need it. Busan has its own industries. Busan has its own network of commerces and businesses. We think that we might end up being able to do a fully integrated neighborhood with different type of programs like hospitals or schools, but not something that is industrial related. NEOM and Oxagon has the advantage of having a blank slate, starting completely from zero, and therefore they dedicated and allocated most of the, I would say, the living spaces on land, and they have a different solution for the industrial part and the commercial part on water. And also let's talk about the fact that Busan in front of it has a very big sea. The NEOM and the Oxagon are very much constrained in a calm, so to say, sea, which also presents different challenges and different requirements for the solution.
말씀하신 그 피에트로
Mr. Matteo Pietrobelli, what mentioned by Mr. Pietrobelli, I would like to summarize after the panel discussion, and I would like to designate my question to Mr. Professor Anderson.
도 잘 아시.
So as you know, Copenhagen is a bicycle-friendly city, and it is the city where bicycles are used most frequently. And I believe it takes up about 35% of transportation. And I believe the mindset of the people in Copenhagen is different, and it is very mature. So do you believe that was, I think that was the driving force behind the success of the city? And you mentioned achieving net zero by 2025. And what would be the most innovative or iconic facility towards this goal? So this might be incorporated in Korea or anywhere else in the world. So is there any iconic or the most innovative facility that you want to highlight in Copenhagen?
Is that better? Yeah. I don't think there's any single one reason for it, and I think that would go for any government, local government at least. That there's not like the floating cities or the floating windmills or the bike lanes or the carbon storage. So I think it's more like a combination of many things you have to do at the same time, like what we call like a portfolio of carbon neutrality techniques. So I think that's really true in Korea, and that's true in Denmark, and I think all our countries. There is no single thing that can do this trick. Sometimes I think politicians forget that in many countries, but so actually I don't think this bike thing is the key to anything in terms of carbon emission. It's an interesting feature, but it's not. I don't think it's really transferable to Korean context. It would require like a total cultural mindset change. It would require extensive infrastructure investment and behavioral attitude, a lot of different things, and it would take so many years before that would be done anyway. So I think it could be done part of it, but it won't. It's not going to happen. Just look at the big cities here. How would that be possible? The roads are too narrow for it, and but there could be something, and I also, by the way, seen some bike lanes in Busan and being done here already. So I think it would be one element. But if I should choose the one that I think is the biggest thing or two biggest thing, if I could mention that, it's the thing about district heating and cooling as a really big thing that in terms of making more energy efficient heating and cooling, it is really big. So that, I think, the one thing, and the other one is this carbon capture. And I think these are the two. If I say what is really that is aggressively and really require a lot of commitments. And I think in the times I've been in Korea, and I had lost count how many times I've been in Korea, the thing that strike me with Korea is this strong government notion. So people don't speak about government as a bad thing here. It's a good thing. And I think we share that in the country I come from, that government is not something you hate or something you want to get rid of. You see it as like a collaborator. There are other countries where there's a different attitude to that. But so, and I think actually the power of Korean government on the city level is also stronger here. So in a way, taking like determined decision and we want it type of thing. It is maybe in a way more feasible here than in a lot of other cities or countries. So I think sort of combination of commitment and using the power of government in Korea would make it a lot more likely. What is a problem then in Korea is, of course, the industry pollution, and that is a problem in Denmark too. The household pollution is one thing. Like people commuting back and forth is one issue, but the big thing is industry pollution, and so Korea is industry exporting country with, and so there's this competitive issue. The more you regulate it, what about their competitiveness? And it's a little bit different in my country. Most of the industry is like services now, and all the industry products are produced in Asia, not only Korea, but also neighboring countries. So sometimes we forget about this Utrecht, Copenhagen, and us, that they had taken away a lot of the industry polluting thing to other countries. So it's sometimes a bit easier for these countries to say, wow, we reduce it, but the industry is different. Carbon emission in Busan, maybe this big issue about what to do with industry is an issue, and I don't know what to say about it. I have no input to that part. I'm just saying that is probably the big trigger here, more so than the household, how to get that solved. Yeah. So thanks.
시간이
Thank you. Due to our time limit, we're a bit behind the schedule, so I will summarize what Professor Anderson mentioned at the end, approaching the end of our panel discussion. He mentioned very important things, so I would like to highlight later on. And I would like to ask my question to Ms. Elaine Murdo. Ms. Elaine Mulder explained us about the case of the city of Utrecht. When we attempt a new city planning or so, there are so many challenges and limitations, so it is very difficult to materialize. But in case of the city of Utrecht, you shared many cases. So as mentioned, I really want to visit there to actually see that. And what's interesting to me was the bee-friendly bus stop. We have solar panel, and we could see many green space on top of the bus stop, so it was very unique. So I would like to pose my question regarding that. You've mentioned about 10-minute city, and in case of Paris, it has planned to make a 15-minute city, and it depends on the city scale. And I would like to ask whether 10-minute city, how you decide 10 minutes, because in order to make a 10-minute city, you need to think about space efficiency and so on. So I would like to ask you why 10 minutes? And due to our time limit, and I will pose the second question right away. With regard to Mervede, I think it's a very well-planned city. And 50% is allocated to green space. And I'm not sure whether we can implement those cases because Korea prefers a residential area over green space. And I would like to know the satisfaction level of the residents. And I would like to know whether they see it as a healthy city and real satisfaction level of the citizens. That's my second question.
Okay, thank you so much. So the first question, why 10 minutes? I think, as you already mentioned a little bit, is that it is about scale. Compared to Busan or Paris, Utrecht is quite small. And so we translated the concepts to our own city. And on the other hand, while we're growing so fast, we really wanted to keep some of the principles that we're quite proud of. And one of that is that everything is quite within reach for our citizens. And it also has this, this notion of how to stay healthy as a city, how to stay compact, how to be in reachable for our citizens. Then it's very important to have your facilities within a 10-minute reach. The example of Merwede, we estimated that if we wouldn't do anything about the mobility and the infrastructure, so if we keep it car-centric, we would have huge traffic jams over a course of like, I don't know, 5 kilometers perhaps, traffic jams for 3 hours. So that's something we really didn't want to. And so we said 10 minutes and we have to really get into other types of transport in order to keep the city and the neighborhood healthy. And the other question, oh gosh, I forgot.
The satisfaction level of the citizens.
Yeah, in terms of green. Yeah, well, Utrecht has really satisfied citizens. I think the rating is like over, in terms of a number, you know, out of 10, it's like 8. And green, we researched, green is a very high contributor in terms of health and well-being for our citizens, also in terms of felt well-being. And it also gives you the opportunity to meet other people. So public space is really important in the development of Utrecht in terms of, and we really relate it to the health and well-being of our citizens. So yes, we have to densify, but we really try to find creative spots and solution to keep it, to keep it greener. And that doesn't necessarily have to be on the ground. You can also create rooftop parks, for instance, and the vertical forest building, for instance, with all native plants and trees. We collaborate a lot with our universities and our private partners. So the bee-friendly bus stops, for instance, that wasn't our own idea. We just said, come up with a solution that contributes to the health and the sustainability of our city. And then the private partner came with the idea of creating bee-friendly bus stops. So, and there's one other thing I really want to add. I really do think that cities can change. Some of our best examples are the hardest fought for, but I really believe that the role of the government is essential in this, in order to change and to also nudge people or your citizens into different behavior. Utrecht used to be a very car-centric city, and over 40 years ago, and we really kept working on different infrastructure, on nudging our citizens into different behavior and create a cultural and behavioral change in the city. So yeah, that is one of my beliefs and ideals as well.
네, 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much. So we heard the comments from the three presenters. We have very little time left with us, and I'd like to give each professor about 3 minutes for your answers. I will ask the question to Professor Jung first. I'll ask a question about the Busan's case. And let's talk about the key challenges and development directions for carbon neutral cities in Korea. In the case of Busan last year, Busan declared that it will achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, and the national goal is to reduce the carbon by 40% by 2030. And Busan's goal is more aggressive than that. I was in charge of the head researcher to develop this goal. Let me introduce Busan. Korea as carbon emission is from 70% is from industry, but the Busan is vice versa. Transportation and construction or buildings take up 70% of the carbon emission. Busan takes up only 2.7% of the national emission because it has weak industry. So in some sense, it could be an opportunity for Busan. So it could be an opportunity for Busan to develop a new industry, and our goal is to reduce emissions from transportation and buildings. How can you achieve carbon neutrality by reducing carbon emissions, these buildings or transportation? And I believe the cases of Utrecht and Copenhagen gives us a lot of insights. So there could be ways for Busan to reduce emissions from transportation. So Busan's focus could be on that part. That's what I thought. And Professor Anderson mentioned something about political or policy agenda. Can it be sustainable? And that was kind of my question when I was doing the projects. And when we developed carbon neutrality plan, but can it be really achievable? That is the thing that we have to really think about hard. And the city has the will now, but institutionalizing it could be a very difficult task. So the proposals from the researchers could be incorporated in the city planning, and in order to do that, we have to institutionalize it. That's what I believe. And in the case of Utrecht, you said 10-minute city, and Busan's goal is to convert the city into a 15-minute city. But there is a long way for us to go, and especially in terms of linking it with the city policy. Well, I don't think this is only confined to Busan only, but I believe all the cities around Korea could share the similar issues, like Chungnam or Gyeonggi-do area where the power plants are concentrated. It could be a different story, but other metropolitan cities around Korea could be facing similar issues, and I believe this may pose as an opportunity for those cities to transit to another type of industries. And the issue here is all these solutions are centering around the Seoul metropolitan city, and I believe the solutions must incorporate or reflect the cases of the other cities as well.
좋은 얘기를 해주셨는데.
Thank you for your comments, and I would like to invite Professor Jae-min Song. What do you think is the challenges that we face, and how local governments could address carbon neutrality? Is there any recommendation that you would like to give? I think there is no one answer, no absolute answer. We need to think about various things. I can summarize into 3. Although I have time limit, but I would like to mention 3 points. First, as you all know, we have Carbon Neutrality Act, and municipal government need to establish their own carbon neutrality plan. But carbon neutrality target is a very quantitative target. If you emit some amount of carbon dioxide, then you need to have a plan to reduce certain amount of CO2. But except for the major cities in Korea, for rural area, it is very difficult to set up the target, and it is very difficult to measure the impact of the plan, and data related to that is very lacking. We have many policy initiatives. In case of the city of Utrecht, there are some plans that works for the city of Utrecht, and there are some plans that work for Copenhagen, and we need to find the most impactful plan that works for our cities. And we need to do some studies on that. The Ministry of Land, Transport and Infrastructure are leading various research and development efforts, and in order to materialize, we need some time. However, we need to continue to monitor such efforts. And second point, and while establishing local carbon neutrality plan by municipal government, there are some things that municipal government can do on their own, but there are some things that should be led by the central government. I think what's important for carbon neutrality is transitioning energy consumption. And regarding energy, I think the role of the central government is very important. So the scope of what can be done by the municipal government is not clear. And most recently, Busan, Seoul, and other cities, you see a lot of advancement or development of transportation means. So when it comes to municipal carbon neutrality plan, Busan is not just Busan. We need to think about cooperation with the nearby cities. So I think cooperation between municipal cities and with the central government, we need to have horizontal and vertical cooperation for carbon neutrality. And third point, we have mentioned this several times before. From the municipal government perspective, whether carbon neutrality is the top priority, if we ask that question, the answer depends on who answered this. There are many local current issues, so how much priority or how much importance we are going to give to carbon neutrality is linked with the policy sustainability. So from that aspect, I think not only we should think about economic development, not just environmental friendliness. We need to think about social equality and so on. I think the eco-friendliness should go together with those social issues as well. The city of Utrecht mentioned about the healthy city, the concept of healthy city. And I think in terms of carbon neutrality, when we establish those policies, it shouldn't be just reducing the carbon dioxide emission. We need to think about the economic development, innovation, and opportunities that the city has as well. I think that it can determine the success of the policy that municipal government introduced. That's it for me. Thank you.
네, 시간이 없는
Due to time constraint, I'm afraid we cannot entertain the questions from the floor. Instead, I would like to summarize and wrap up what has been discussed. We are in Busan, and Busan is aiming to host the World Expo in 2030. And it is one of the most representative carbon neutral city, and it is at a very important crossroads. And during the conference, we could deduce several points, important points. When you heard the presentation from Oceanics, what is the difference between Oceanics and the Neom City? And it is a floating city, and it also has to utilize what the city is really good at and scale the project from that. And then Busan City really has to realize what are the strengths of Busan and how can it incorporate the current situation that it has to come up with a plan to achieve the carbon neutrality. It shouldn't just follow others, but it should have a unique model. And from the second presentation by Professor Anderson, I could think that so the Copenhagen and Busan could be different, but Busan's emission from industry is relatively low, but Busan has a huge trade port. We will have to think about how we can support the industry related to the port. Becoming a carbon neutrality could create new jobs, but those are mostly social jobs. It's not from the industry itself, but it's from it could be personalized or inclusive industry that is different from the current type of industry. Then Busan's approach could be this towards this industry, and they have to create the business track, and it should be participated by the citizens. So that's the model that Busan has to really think about. And from the case of Utrecht, a 10-minute city could be dependent upon the scale itself or scalability. Korea likes to be the best in the world, and then we will have to actually balance between the quality and speed. So we have to be patient. As I work on the smart city projects, I feel that as we just focus on technology and the individuality, we can enjoy the variety or diversity, but in tackling the huge or grand issue of climate issue, it's not enough. It's like fighting a big war in the with just infantry soldiers only. So the carbon neutrality cannot be achieved by the efforts of governments only or industry only. It also requires the participation of the people, and we have to gather wisdom, and we can we talked. And Busan is innovative, open, and unique. So if we think about the characteristic of the city, going forward, the city government should have a big picture, just like the central government does, and it should stick to a sustainable policy. Then Busan can have its own model to achieve carbon neutrality. I hope this session has given you lots of lessons and insights, and thank you for staying with us till the end. And I hope we continue this kind of discussion going forward. I'd like to thank our panelists, presenters, for sharing their insights. Thank you.
네, 훌륭한 진행을 해주신
I would like to thank our moderator, Dr. Cho, and all the panelists who have shared their wonderful insight. Once again, thank you. Please go back to your seats.
입니다.
Thank you. Please give them a big round of applause once again.
네, 환경뿐만 아니
We talked about the environment, economic development, and local government innovation. So from that aspect, we need to make a healthy city, and we could get a lot of insights from different cities across the globe. I hope that Busan could march the same way in order to achieve carbon neutrality goal. So this concludes City Summit Part 2 Carbon Neutrality City Conference. I would like to thank all speakers from home and abroad and our online speaker who has joined us amidst busy schedule. I could learn a lot through this conference. This concludes the 2023 World Climate Industry Expo City Summit Part 2. Thank you.